intensifying cycle of economic, societal, and government upheaval, so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
And welcome to everybody out here tonight joining us on this beautiful blue planet. Another day of life, another day of breath to take our planet back from the darkness. When we wake in the morning, what's on your mind? We see we're in a time of great change. And as we approach these three events that are going to shift and shake our civilization through the next 8 months, how will it move from day to day as the awareness or just the general feeling of the world in the future that we've counted on so greatly as stability of the rock we build our foundation of beliefs on is cracked, shaken, and eroded? Will you save for retirement in 50 years, 40 years, 30 years if you know that commentary impact is coming to really take the face of our planet by storm beginning March of next year? The Shepherd's Cross coming here December 6th this year, where Jupiter, Earth, Mercury, and Sun are in a perfect line. And then on that same cross, we have Mars, Earth, and Venus. They call it the Shepherd's Cross. Mercury magnetic, an iron core planet. Jupiter always the tug anyway. Anytime the Jupiter Earth Sun connection, there's always 7.0 earthquakes. But this time we're going to have Mercury, the iron core body of our solar system, in an alignment with that, as well as Venus, our captured comet, and Mars, the planet of war. So if you're starting to look for signs in the heavens when observers from our planet would look to the night sky and start to see these cycles that would return, that would cause great difficulty for our world, you would be an observer from Earth. And this is what you would see. The connections in the heavens, these bodies that come and go. And when they do, they leave a distinct fingerprint of change. And then we come into October of this year, just a few months from now, not even a few. It's actually a little over 45 days from now. The planets perceived from Earth will be in a square. Now, I've had some people come back to me and say, well, you didn't take a top-down view from like 1 light year out, or, however many, Earth, astronomical units away from, looking down on the solar system from like 15 astronomical units directly above. And I'm like, well, you know what? That's not the way those that observe these cycles would have observed it. They would be stationary on a high vantage point looking out to the heavens from the Earth, not from, 15 times the distance of the sun directly above us down onto the solar system and going, well, it's not a perfect square. But from the Earth perceived, it is. That's the whole thing. And the gravitational electromagnetic effects pulling on that, well, and I wanted to run through some of the Earth changes tonight and some of the crop losses we're experiencing. It's not so much about the drought or about the massive floods, the 100-year floods in Europe. It's not about that. That's an effect of something greater that is now piling on top of all this moisture coming out of the atmosphere from the Hunga Tonga eruption. Got some great new charts here. Cap all on right over there from Electroverse, putting out electroverse.space with all these amazing charts. I mean, I've been looking for these too. It takes a fair bit of digging, but I haven't found as much information. You compiled it all together. You can absolutely say thank you, Cap, for doing that. And I'm saying from the bottom of my heart, thank you for bringing this info out, because this kind of really consolidates it now, where we can see where the moisture is in the latitudes around the world and where we can expect the largest floods from now, based on the past and the 2 years, on those same charts of where the moisture is gone in the atmosphere and where it will rain back out of the atmosphere. This is the whole thing. So where does it go from here is the question. So when you look at these floods and these droughts on the 4 continents happening simultaneously, is it really about the flood or the drought? For me, it's more about the losses of crops. That's one thing we need to think about, is the loss of crops. You can look all day long and say, yeah, the city got flooded. That's $1.5 billion of damage. There's so much damage occurring right now that insurance companies literally are not going to be able to hold it together very much longer. That's just like one effect. But when you start to wipe out 20% of Europe's grain production, that's a big number to go down at harvest season right now. And the thing that dovetails with that is that right after they harvest, they're immediately within a week into tilling the fields to plant the winter barley, the winter wheat for the spring harvest season. So what has occurred right now in Austria, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic? Now, these are some major grain producers across the EU. They're underwater, literally underwater. This is the biggest floods in 100 years going through there. So when you look at the amount of crops not going to be harvested and then not going to be planted, and then Ukraine offline pretty much. I was reading some report about Ukraine and they go, well, there's going to be a few million tons less in the beginning of the war. And I'm like, you don't even have any roads left over there. How's that even? They're absconding with 750,000 men to go fight this thing that have just disappeared. Like, there's nobody to work the farms. There's nobody to work the machines. There's nobody to repair the machines. There's no way they're getting grain in. They're not planting a thing. Yeah, maybe some little tiny farm over far west out there bordering on, Poland or something. Ukraine's literally offline. And that was a major grain producer. And then we start to look at all these anomalies occurring across the planet. Now, Ransom's going to be putting up some slides as we go through the evening here, so I really hope you can join us up on Rumble. I'm going to try to lay it out the best I can, because I seem to be one of the only people in the United States covering this in depth in terms of the flood heights, the river gauges, the croplands that are being pushed underwater, Slovakia, Hungary, and that water's got to go somewhere down into Romania next. You start to look at the floods, and it was from Poland, like I say, Czech Republic, Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, and now that is sliding down to Romania. Now, that's just going to be river damage, but further afield, and please remember, nobody on the climate side is talking about this much. They had 10 feet of snowfall last week, 10 feet in the higher elevations of Austria, also parts of Italy, a little bit into Switzerland. Record-breaking snowfall, and that was back around the 10th of 11th, somewhere around that in September. Not many people were paying attention to that. Well, you can't have record snowfall and then claim global warming and want to institute a global tax, and then at the same time record floods from some strange storm that popped out of nowhere and sent moisture up that shouldn't be there. And we experience the same thing. A storm comes out of nowhere. And if the American media has been very not kind covering this North Carolina flood disaster as well. So here's the story. You're supposed to believe this. Now, try not to laugh. 3 days ago, they said, there's a possibility of some, rain coming in North Carolina. Within 12 hours, it turned from possibility of thunderstorms coming in on a front into a Category 1 hurricane in 12 hours, dropping 13 inches of rain across North Carolina with almost no warning. And then people were asking, how is this even possible? This storm literally came out of nowhere. And that's exactly the same thing, this storm, I think it was called Boris, that came out of the Mediterranean. It was not there 1 minute, and the very next minute, it was a hurricane. Now, you put that in perspective, usually you get days and days and days and days of warning where they see it as a tropical, system, a depression, and then it turns into something more developed like a tropical storm, and then they see it, heating and developing, and then it becomes like a Category 1, and then it can intensify from there. But you don't go from a cloud formation, like a cloud bank of thunderstorms, into a hurricane in 12 hours in 2 different places in the planet in the same week. Like something is definitely off here in terms of electromagnetic, I'm going to say ripping of our magnetic field, allowing some strange occurrences to amplify our weather system on the planet. That's the only way to describe it. What we were looking at here is borderline supernatural. Like you cannot really, with a straight face, tell me we get 1,000-year rainfall in the Carolinas, but none of the weather forecasters had predicted anything other than intense lines of thunderstorms coming through. We have the top satellite forecasting weather system on the planet, and it didn't detect either of these storms until it was already at hurricane strength. And then suddenly they just rolled over these areas, and without warning, massive floods come through. There was no flood control in Czech Republic and Poland. I mean, they were caught completely off guard, flat-footed. I mean, when it started raining, they already started going up in record floods at 6 inches over, a several-hour period. And just where did it come from? North Carolina, the same. So I'm asking you, with this perceived square of the gas giants looked at, viewed from Earth, and some of the last times on, the preciseness of this would have been 79 AD for the best match. I know it occurred, it was like 1305. There was another one that was pretty close. They had one prior that was around like 425 BC. It was pretty close also. But when you start to look at the geometry of the planets where they sit in the heavens in this perceived square from our Earth as a viewpoint, it's only occurred a few times since the last couple millennia. And this is here at our doorstep, and literally months from now. And all these anomalies are occurring, and you're not supposed to believe that it's related or talk about the relationship of it relating to the extremes. So I can't talk about an atmospheric river. And D. Fries, I hear you out there. Can you talk about atmospheric rivers, ripples of new swift running waters? No, because that's verboten in today's world. Now, what is that? I'm going to read a comment. I bet you double or nothing. Yeah, when are we going to do this? David Ransom, love it. Yes, we do. Weather warfare at its finest, geoengineering. I'm not sure exactly if that has something to push into it, or is it not? That's where I kind of get lost into the translation here, for a better term. I understand the tech is out there, and I had this very, that's strange. I had this very discussion earlier on. Who was I with today? I was over with Eric Gajewski at Tradcat Night. I don't know if you're familiar with Tradcat. He has a bunch of different opinions and guests come on a show. But I was talking about, if you look down at the Antarctic vortex, currently it's not circular any longer. It is a peanut shape. Or for a better term, the infinity symbol, a figure 8. I'm going to say that again so we can understand this. Over Antarctica, the vortex, which normally is a circle like we have in the northern hemisphere, has turned into a twisted infinity symbol, or what you would consider the letter 8 in a circulation pattern over Antarctica. And they are baffled why this is happening in the same weeks that hurricanes are seemingly popping out of nowhere with no forecastability off of thunderstorm fronts. So I was having the discussion, like, how developed is our technology now, and could we heat an area in the sky and have wind patterns bend around it to the point where they could knock the polar vortex off of its centered base and cause record cold to flow down any part of the northern hemisphere they wanted to at any time of the year? And this is where we got into the technology discussion of how advanced is the tech on this. Could they put up a blocking front that in turn would jam up the wind patterns in the jet stream and force part of the Arctic vortex over onto whatever part of the world that they chose to drive that cold air? Like last year, please remember, what was it, January of this year, 2024, at least here in Tennessee, we had the coldest record temperatures ever recorded, ever, blowing away the 1880s records. These kind of anomalies where the Arctic vortex is pushed out of its normal circular pattern and then just drives over parts of the planet in the northern hemisphere. Is the tech that advanced? That's the question. So geoengineering, I get it. You can seed up there all you want. Metals, nanoparticulates, you got the barium, the strontium, the aluminum. Yeah. Ionospheric heaters, and who's that? Jim Lee over at Climate Viewer, the best on the planet to explain that to you. Dane Wigington, also a good one. Although, Dane, if you're listening, man, I've sent you about 30 emails in a row asking you to come up and get on the show and debate that you don't think that there's anything to do with the sun, that it's only man-made geoengineering that's driving every single change on the planet. It's 100% man-made, and you're not saying that the sun has anything to do with it. And I really wanted to discuss it with you because you're the expert on the planet about geoengineering. So cannot these two sciences intertwine? Or if you understood how electromagnetic changes on the planet would amplify the ability for metals to take on a different magnetic charge and could be heated, bent, or, ionized in a different fashion, then that in turn could block patterns even faster and larger and cause even larger jet stream swings that could push the polar vortex off its bound. It can't all be 100% man-made. I'm getting at that right now, so I wanted to have the discussion. So, Dane, if you're out there, the offer still stands, and I think I've been sending emails out to Dane Wigington since 2017, and he still doesn't want to talk to me about that because I refuse to believe it's 100% geoengineering, that there's some combination or ratio of solar activity, electromagnetic changes, magnetic field change, in addition to all of that. I believe there's a coupling somehow. And if you knew the cycle was returning, you absolutely could ride on top of this cycle like a bucking bronco, get on top of this thing, use the tech available, and absolutely bend anything you wanted to in terms of weather on the planet, because the amplified effects from a different magnetic field would allow, different outcomes that were not possible before. Now, am I saying all of these extremes we're seeing are man-made? Not a chance. But what I am saying is that there's a possibility that there is some amplification on the man-made side into the natural amplification of just mixed up weather patterns, jet streams, cloud cells moving into different locations. And when I say cloud cells, I am talking about those big Hadley cells from the equator to 30 north and 30 to 60. Those are also moving 5 degrees, which is 300 miles into different locations. So even on that gargantuan girth of something that runs from 30 to 60, thousands of miles in churning atmosphere on like a conveyor belt, that in itself is turning and moving, in addition to just the regular jet streams that we see, those flows of air that the aircraft catch to shoot across the planet. It's all changing. And, Ransom's throwing up some different images here and graphics for us over on the Adapt 2030 channel on Rumble. Trying to move away from the Mini Ice Age Conversations YouTube channel because, there's a little bit of censorship going on over there. So we're going to try to move over to Rumble. So thank you for joining us and moving over to Rumble for our live show. Now, the current is also leaking if you want to leave that up there. Earth's ring current. So this is a brand new article coming out. So there's been just solar storm after solar storm and geomagnetic storm and whatever is G3. They're so common now that you kind of lose track. If you had a G3 with the KP8, that was a big one. And you remember whoa, there was a huge one last month or 2 months ago that sent Aurora all the way down to Tennessee. Those are common now. See, this is the thing. The extremes of before are now becoming the common. And now the extremes of now are becoming, we have never even contemplated the magnitude of possibility of this. This is where we get into the next few months. You're telling me Africa is becoming wetter across all of North Africa and the Sahel, turning into grasslands across deserts now. That all of these magnetic changes are here. Now, the Earth's ring current, this is the whole thing with these geomagnetic storms. They believe there's a tear in the magnetosphere that is allowing different ionized particles to, well, air glow and be visible. The thing is that I was reading between the lines on the story here is they can't quite explain it, or they don't want to currently come out and explain how there is a rip through this. What was our shields? Literally, think Star Trek. The shields are up, Scotty. That got ripped, and now these particles are able to pour in, and as they hit what is considered our thin atmosphere, they start to ionize and change, glow, and they call it air glow for a better term. But it's so high up that it doesn't make sense that it would be an auroral rope. So this is the thing, they called it Steve. And I remember back in 2016 when I was doing the Adapt 2030 channel, the first time they cited this, there was a bunch of fishermen, they were drinking and they saw this auroral rope. And the first person to cite something or see it or discover it gets to name it. Well, they were all drinking one night out on a lake far north in Canada, and they saw this auroral rope, and the guy's name was Steve. So they'll name it Steve. So anytime you see auroral ropes, which would be two different currents wrapping on themselves of plasma that look like literally a rope in the sky, which is the center of Squatter Man before it goes off with the four appendages, we at least have the beginnings of the center body of Squatter Man now visible in our skies. And it's been like that since 2016. There were a few sightings of Steve. We'd seen it, maybe once a year, but now it is every single month, every month. And it's intensifying. And they got to rip across the magnetic field of our planet somewhere up there. The magnetosphere has some cavitation has allowed previously undetectable or not able to penetrate that magnetic sheath coming in now. And it's red, and it looks like Steve, but it is a much, much, much higher altitude, and the size of it is mind-bogglingly large. It stretches across as far as the eye can see across the sky. At least these images that I'd seen before, a couple of them are coming off of spaceweather.com. When you see it, it's literally across the sky. Now, most of these aurora ropes that you see, they're in the aurora, but they're much darker and they're very visible, super easy to see. But they're like strings in the sky. They don't cover the sky. This is the whole thing here. The aurora ropes are very, very different than what we saw with this ring current rip and the ionization and the air glow happening during there. This is orders of magnitude far larger than anything on a plasma rope that's seen in our atmosphere. Like, this is truly coming close to petroglyphs carved on a canyon wall. It is the very beginning of us starting to see that in our skies again. Now, if you put this into perspective, now how does this start to bend society? Because I look at this every day. So, I'm in this kind of genre of this is the news I surf. But the average person has never seen this. Now, if you take the average person out there and they see this big, giant red snake going across the sky, for a better term, of ionized plasma in air glow mode, and you say to that, what do you think that is? And they're like, I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. Okay, would they be nervous, scared? I don't know. Maybe they would think it's an anomaly. But once you put the science behind it, go, by the way, the magnetosphere, that ripped up there, and that allowed different particles to come through that have never come through before. And when they hit our atmosphere and they start to interact up there, it starts to glow. And that has never happened before. And actually, you look at the Chaco Canyon and all those like squiggly lines. That's what they're trying to represent on the canyon walls. And we're back at it again. So please continue to pay your taxes, invest, and go to work and obey the law. This is what you're trying to prevent planetary panic. We are at the level of trying to prevent planetary panic. And now at the same time, we got, like I say, we got rips in the ring current leaking is a better term. They don't want to call it a rip. They say it's a leak. I mean, which one's scarier for humanity, a rip or a leak? It's a drip. Anyway, it is a drip, at least on that part of the planet. And then seemingly out of nowhere, hurricanes are just popping up in literally 12 hours of just thunderstorm fronts into full hurricanes in 12 hours. That's not normal. Look down at the southern hemisphere. A figure 8 loop is our new wind pattern down there over in Antarctica. And this is all happening right now, all in unison in these last 2 weeks. Has all started to like come alive at the last 2 weeks. And we are moving into this squaring of the planets not seen, in at least 1,500 years. I'll be generous and say 1,301 or 1,305 was the last pretty good match on it. But the exact match, at least in my opinion, would have been 79 AD. Another instant, 425 BC. And we're talking a long time ago before we've seen something very similar with this. So would you not expect massive things that we haven't seen in thousands of years to begin again? It's kind of cause and effect, where if you see something that's coming back again as a real cycle that can be measured, not seen in a couple thousand years, you might think to yourself, gee, I wonder if there'd be any kind of weird anomalies in the atmosphere, like earthquakes or kind of strange stuff that we haven't seen in a couple thousand years. And it seems to be, at least on the surface, matching so far. But what happens when we come to the Shepherd's Cross? I mean, that's going to be making news. When it comes into December, just before Christmas, so we got a cross formation in the sky that involves our planet with Jupiter, the Earth, Mercury, the Sun, and then on the cross where the arms would be, we got Mars, Earth, and Venus, just weeks before Christmas. Now, if you don't think that's going to be making international news all the time, and then this will validate that some of these planetary alignments can trigger earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. I mean, look at that. Kilauea comes alive right now again. And you're telling me, people are trying to dissuade me from talking about this. The pressure is deep. I've had many people come to me and say, you need to stop talking about this. You can't talk about this. You're just taking people on the wrong track. You're going to scare people. You should pull it back. You shouldn't do this. But I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe if nothing had been happening by now, I might say, I might have been wrong. And I'll admit I'm wrong if I'm wrong. But all these things just randomly coming up and just amplifying and just strangeness that we're seeing, and smoke rings in the sky and just like crossing waves of steam coming off of them. I mean, there's just an enormous amount of things that are borderline not explainable happening right now. Okay, here we go. Herb Green. I've seen Steve down here in California. My parents were in the car with me when I saw it. I kind of freaked out. Tried to point it to them. They didn't even look. I blame the TV for them being NPCs. Well, you know what? I'm glad you saw that. Again, there's a very important statement here. NPCs. There are so many people that are not ready to be awakened. And by trying to awaken them, you're doing more damage to them and yourself in the relationship that you have by trying to awaken them. I mean, it's always going to be, there's always a percentage of people throughout history. There's always a certain percent. There's 5% that will always never be controllable in the mind. And then you have another 15% that are very open to new ideas that are very difficult to brainwash or to narrative scrub, because they're more open-minded. They're willing. They're like a lot of the travelers, it's the same kind of, like a lot of people who travel a lot, hard to pull the wool over the eyes on them with a lot of things, people who've never been out of country before. And then you got a full 50%, 50, I'm going to say it again, 50% that are never going to wake up, that drink the Kool-Aid. They take it hook, line, and sinker every single time. And see, this is what, like the powers that be depend for the rock of stability to keep the society moving. And at the same time, those powers that be depend on that 50% of NPCs to corral you in as an individual that don't talk about that. They're going to think you're weird. Oh, don't talk about that. Every time you talk about that at a party, people just like, oh, I don't want to hear that. They try to get you to self-censor, but they count on that as being part of the MO. The 50% of the NPCs are always going to try to rein in the conversation of, it's too risque to talk about that. I've been part of that, so I can speak firsthand about it. But now it seems like I was the one with the crystal ball. When you talk about these things, nobody wanted to talk about 9/11 and the buildings just suddenly free falling. Oh, no. People are going to think you're weird for talking about that. And every time one of these events were to come up and you question the story of it, if you don't kowtow to the mainstream status quo, then you're considered, well, a freak, an outsider. Oh, no, don't. That's bad party conversation. Because I was always taught, don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics at a party, but I can't even talk about the weather at a party anymore. That's verboten also. You can't talk about weather any longer. Like, wait, what kind of world do we live in where the most safest subject before was like, hey, how's the weather? No, you can't talk about, well, actually, if you ask me that, hey, how's the weather at a party that I'm at, you're going to probably get a longer answer than you thought you would. Oh, and this 18-meter wave recorded off Tasmanian West Coast. So for those of you in the U.S., you need to multiply by 3. So we're going to go 20 multiplied by 3. So we're looking at a good 60 foot plus wave here. And this was one of the biggest waves, if not the biggest wave recorded in some time. They had huge 20-meter waves. And again, these are popping up out of nowhere, and we're getting the record cold across Australia. And another thing that's going on, the sun is behaving strangely, if anybody hasn't noticed, because the temperatures on the planet are reflecting what has happened with the sunspot count. Like, if you were following anything with the sunspots, and there's a great website to go to, sislo.com, sislo.com, and they keep up all the different sunspot monitoring, either over the entire duration of sunspot cycles from the 1650s forward, all the way to the current cycles, and then they go back 3 cycles, and then you can match up different intensities of cycle onset, peak, and then come into the solar minimums or the troughs of those cycle peaks and lows. Everybody and their mother's uncle that was a professional, quote unquote professional, said that they were absolutely at solar maximum. We were going to start to decline off already, which was 3 years early, by the way. I was in agreement with that. I thought sunspots were going to be lower this cycle anyway, based on grand solar minimum forecasts that were given, based on how the sun's dual magnetic field in layers off the surface layer, what we see as the corona, and then further down in, underneath the sun, there's a second layer of magnetic fielding subsurface. There's a dual field there. So anyway, that kind of forecasting out was saying, well, they're going to cancel each other out. So you're going to have 8 different canceling waves on the sun. They're going to turn it off basically, or reduce its activity. But the thing that's behaving strangely right now on the sun is all forecasters, everybody in unison is saying, okay, we've reached peak max already. Although it's 3 years early, doesn't matter. It will still reach peak maximum. And then like 3 weeks ago, it went straight up. And I mean, literally straight up. From something like 225 sunspots to about 250 average. I mean, literally a Loch Ness monster neck straight up of sunspot. Like they'd never seen. You got to realize in the last 400 years of observing sunspots, this has never been seen either. So when you're talking about cycles and things that are kind of out of the ordinary, this would quantify as one of those, where the sunspot count jumping so gargantuanly in just a short amount of time, straight up. I mean, they literally haven't seen anything like this before. So when you start to look at it, there is a far greater influence on the planet occurring. So then the next thing is, how do you keep the planet's population in check when the food gets more expensive from now? I mean, it's already gotten so expensive anyway that people are really angry that the food's so expensive. we've all seen the prices rise to the point of being unaffordable for a lot of things. Sometimes you just leave it on the shelf. I'm not going to spend like $15 on a can of olives. That's ridiculous. There's no way. You know, things like this, like capers. I'm a fan of capers on my salad. But you know, now I got to get the big jar of those because getting the small jars is like really ridiculous, unaffordable. But I still need my capers. But I'm not, you know. Everybody, I don't care what you're buying, is feeling food price increases. And you might laugh and go, "Oh, dude, you need steaks." Well, the meat we buy is from the Amish, so we tell the guy over there who has the cattle, and he also has lamb, by the way, which I'm getting another lamb next week. It's going to be about 120-pound, nice marbling in it. I'll butcher that myself because I've already butchered probably like 5 or 6 lamb, getting better at it. It's a skill to learn how to butcher an animal. We did our turkeys ourselves after our neighbor harvested those. So I was able to take down 2 35-pound turkeys and then, you know, get the breasts out of those and do a bunch of stuff. It's a skill set. We don't buy meat from the store. So when people talk about, well, meat's getting really expensive, I don't understand that because I'm not in that world. But I do understand everything that I see that I would buy in a store is getting way more expensive. So I actually feel everybody out there with the meat. It's just we buy 1,000-pound animal and have somebody process that for us. So whatever you get, oh, that's a good sunspot chart there. You can see how on the far right it just goes vertical. It just doesn't normally do that, you know, on the far right on the international count over there at solar cycle 25. So to have buying in bulk is another option for a lot of people. If you can get a full cow or a full beef, as they call it, and then split it up with some people, that's definitely the way to go. So yeah, Ransom, you need to mill about in there where it says data and then come back into, when you click on the data side there, come into this solar cycle in the last 12 months and you can even do in the last 3 solar cycles on that too and get some better numbers on it. But think about buying in bulk. If you get a full beef, you get all the cuts, like the filet mignon is in there, the T-bone steaks are in there, everything's in there. But yeah, there's a lot of hamburger, but we'd get that hamburger and have the butcher turn that into sausages for us. So we like to do the Italian sausage, maybe a little spicy sausage where they throw some cayenne pepper in it. And you're going to want to go to the plot, PLOT. That's all the pictures where the graphic plots are, because CVS or text you need a computer to read that. But plot is the blue. The blue is where you want to go. Sunspot number is the first one. You want to click on that, and then it'll be good. And yeah, so you're going to have to think about how you're going to get your meats moving forward, because it's going to get, well, a little more, how should we say, difficult to get proteins moving forward. Because you see the Klaus Schwab, not the Schwab cycles, SCHWABB, double B is for the solar activity, the Schwab cycles, and then Klaus Schwab, single B, is the one trying to change the planet, and they want to do away with meats and proteins. But here's where it kind of intersects together. We got the economy in a shift. We got the whole world in a transition. Yeah, there you go. Look how it pops off there, vertical. We got the world in transition as we see. And you're telling me that all this transition is occurring in the last 2 to 3 years. Then the COVID came in, and I would say that was the beginning. They absolutely knew the solar activity was going to flip right now. And as we enter right now into this squaring of the planets, all of the absolute chaos that we're seeing, and then we have the elections coming in with the October surprise. The weather anomalies are starting to rip our infrastructure apart, as well as the supply chains. The crop losses are staggeringly just numbing looking at them, from Japan with the losses in rice, China with its main grow belt underwater. Europe's not looking very good. You know, the Ukraine's offline. France reduced its wheat supply 25% magically because what, a drought or something. And everywhere you look, at least in spackling parts of America, also reductions in corn and soy. Although soybeans this year, they're rocking on the soy. It's really going to be some very, very high yields with soy. The rest of it, not so much. So how do you come out of this? That's the question. And here's a good one too. BC4060, like 40, BC4060. If you can no longer afford a cow, get a pig. Versatile and cheaper. I'll agree. Because a hog, if you buy a hog, they're going to be about 300 pounds. And they're going to be lower per pound also than if you're going to get beef. God, I would have to look at my receipt that I got, but I'm going to say it was like 225 a pound. No, it was less than that. It was, so last time we got 800-pound animals. So it was $2 a pound for the beef, live weight. And then hanging weight is what they charge on the cut fee, or when you fill out your cut sheet. They're going to do hanging weight. And that means after you have a live cow, they take it, somebody dispatches that, they remove the head, they remove the feet, the hooves, take out the organs out of that, and then whatever weight you're left with, that's what the butcher will charge you on your fee on the hanging weight. Pigs are way easier to do, and the pig I think was coming in at $1.45 a pound. I can't remember. We got one last year also at Thanksgiving, and the Amish smoked it up for us in their smokehouse. But here's the thing, the Amish, they don't use electricity, so you can't go get a hog butchered any time of the year you want. With the Amish, you need to wait until next month when it's cold enough for them to operate. Like, they only start butchering really in middle to late October. Maybe 1st of November would probably be a better assessment. They don't have refrigeration. They use natural refrigeration air flow through. So you're looking at only like November 1st through maybe end of February, early March, then they stop. At least in Tennessee, that's the coldest time. That's the only time they can really like butcher. So if you're going to go to something more natural, we're not talking about a USDA freezer that's 15 below zero that they can do at any time, day or night, 24/7. We are talking about a natural flow and process of how you integrate with the seasons. You need to order in advance. See, they need to raise that animal for you. And this is the whole thing. You really, really, really need to know your farmers now, because like we have the luxury of going in, and since we bought animals several years in a row, not only do they know us because we go there a lot, we trade some stuff with them. Oh, here comes the C-130. Yeah, they run low-level flights through here on Thursday nights down the valley. You got to order the animal in advance. Like, once they know that you want one, they will raise it for you out in the field. And that's yours. Now, you don't want to name it, and you don't want to go to pet it and make it a pet or anything, but they will put it and hold it for you in the field, run it out on pasture, and then they'll finish it with their own heirloom grown corn, by the way. But you need to absolutely secure those animals in advance. So this is what we do. We get one lamb, which we'll pick up next week, and you can butcher that thing out in a couple of hours, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't really be. Then we'll put it in the freezer, obviously. The hog, that'll come on end of next month, end of October, and we'll have that smoked up, and it'll be ready before Thanksgiving by a couple weeks. And man, when they smoke, I'm talking nice cherry wood smokehouse, deep, dark on the outside of the meat, and perfectly finished and cooked on the inside for the hams. And then the beef itself, it's all farm raised, literally farm raised from start to finish, grass fed, out on their own pastures with no chemical. They don't spray to knock down certain weeds in the hay in the field, and they grow their own heirloom corn on multiple acres out there to finish off the cattle and the hog also. But it's a rhythm. So we try to get 3 animals every year, and we can't, take 1,000-pound cow ourselves or a beef. So we try to split it with somebody. So, again, I would be out there knocking on your door and going, hey, we got 500-pound of meat we need to get rid of, or not get rid of, but to share. Would you want to, chip in on that? Okay. It'll be this much, this much, this much. So these are things you need to think about. And who's that? T.R. Hammond says, I grow lettuce, radishes, kale, potatoes. My herbs are in there. Yep. Wood stove is mine. So, you can burn tomatoes? What? You can fire off anything, I guess. But again, wood stove, great idea. You just sparked a thought. What if we go into a power outage this year? If you go into a power outage at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, like it would have in Tennessee here, they were so close to going completely blackout during that time that they had the highest pull on the grid they'd ever had for people trying to draw electricity, because it just doesn't get that cold. And a lot of people are running heat pumps here, with HVAC units that are not running gas. Nobody's running pipes out miles and miles and miles onto a farm, you know what I mean? So if you got wood stove, you got heat. Because going down on power in the middle of a blizzard or some sub-zero days Fahrenheit, and you're not used to that, that's terrifying. So having a wood stove or a backup, I'll tell you one of our backups, we have these oil recirculating heaters. So if power does go down, we can plug those in on the generator. And even after you turn them off, they'll still retain heat and kick out heat for like an hour plus. So, we've got one for each room. They're very energy efficient, hardly draw anything at all. But, man, you leave them on too long and you're sweating in the room. So thinking about this. And what else do we got here? I wanted to read through a couple comments. Oh, I ordered my cow in January, ready in September. Yep. Raising animals is not an instantaneous thing. It takes months and months and months. So that's why you got to know your farmers. If you don't know them, you're doing yourself and your family a disservice by not understanding where your food supply comes from, how difficult it is to raise food or grow food, and then having that intimate flow of the seasons of when are these animals giving birth to their young. You ever see a little lamb being born and that little thing pops up in like 2 seconds and can already walk away? And just how incredibly, like, oh man, when you say something's cute as an animal and they got these little lambs, these things are like, 10 pounds, little bundles of energy and like the cutest little things you've ever seen. And like, wow, just watching nature in its rhythm on the birthing cycle. And that's when you don't want to take any animals, because all those animals are giving birth at the same time and raising their young through the, that's why you don't want to hunt during the summertime, because they're raising their young. So they have large, healthy animals that you can hunt in the winter season or getting, toward the end of the year. Like the rule up here, even with the rabbits, although we do have a pest license for our farm out here, the rabbits, you're not supposed to eat them unless the month ends with an R. But still, we got so many, there's a pest problem with the rabbits on a lot of places. So you can get a pest license for that and you can hunt them out of season. You're not supposed to like sell them or anything. I wouldn't really eat one without an R month anyway, but when they're ripping through your crops, and a lot of people are growing, specialty crops. And if you can't get a hold of the rabbits, it's time to get the night scope out and go at it, But that is nature's cycle. If there aren't enough coyote out there to take away enough rabbits on there in your property, then that means there's a disconnect and something in that web of life is broken. We got a lot of coyote running around too, but they're not really coming in to, jump over your fence and get in your house and eat you, because there's enough food for them out there in the natural ecosystem. There should be a balance in there somewhere. If you got coyotes creeping onto your property, that's an imbalance. If you need to hunt the coyote because they're coming in on your livestock and thing, well, that means that whatever wild predation that they're onto has disappeared. So, once you start to get this flow of knowing where your food comes from and being integrated in that full system, you really start to appreciate and understand this like breath of seasons, this rebirth and this dieback. I don't know. I guess I get into I really, especially with the changing leaves, they started to change now. We got a lot of red leaves coming on heavy. And let me see what other things here. And by the way, thank you, Revolution Radio, for letting us allow broadcast tonight, or myself. Ransom's running all the tech behind here. So any of the images, thank him for that tonight. And also keeping us live on several platforms, Revolution Radio here. Also up on Rumble, the Adapt 2030 channel, Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. We're up on Vigilante TV, over on Brighteon TV, Brighteon.com, excuse me. And also check out our website, civilizationcycle.com. So all the things that I'm talking about tonight, I'll send to you in a quick 8 bullet points over the week, just a single one page about the show notes. So you have these ideas we were talking about, because, I run through it, a lot of information. We put up a bunch of slides try to keep you engaged and also, have you continue the conversation. The whole thing is about in the comment box here on Rumble is let's have the conversation. Like, this is good. What are people talking about? What's engaging? What are you thinking about? It's great for me and Ransom to throw some points out there, but really, what does everybody else out here want to talk about? That's more important for us is what do you want to hear? What do you want to discuss? And when you have people in the chat box talking back and forth, and we're trying to ping out some of these different comments as well. Here's another one. This goes right along with the Amish. T.R. Hammond says, I have a wood stove in the house and in the greenhouse, which is connected to my house off the kitchen. And this is the same thing. Every family, at least at the Amish farms where we're close to, every single one has a wood stove in the greenhouse, and they all have greenhouses. And the first time I'd ever gone over there to see them, I saw these like 3-foot long pieces of firewood that had already been quartered out long ways. So, they quartered a log, but it was a 3-foot long log, and they quartered it. And I'm like, what are they doing with these 3-foot long logs that are quartered out? I'm like, that's way too long for a regular wood stove. Like, you're talking about a foot or so for a wood stove. Like, what are these logs? It was for the greenhouse because they have really long water burners in there. And they're able to grow veg all year long, even if it's, snowing outside or something. They're still able to put a bunch of veg out through by having that wood stove in the greenhouse. Now, why are parts of the desert and the Sahara starting to green, do you think? Now, if Washington Post is picking up the story here, why are parts of the Sahara Desert turning green? That should kind of, say what? Because the Washington Compost, they are the most global warming, green agenda friendly publication in America. But for them to come out and absolutely reverse themselves on a dime, because they were the ones telling you that the Sahel was going to dry out and Lake Chad was going to go down into a pond with almost nothing, where frog tadpoles couldn't even exist because there would be no water. So all these people followed with their villages, following the lake down, and then they finally got to the bottom and they're like, well, it is going to dry out, and boom, it reversed, and it is record flood. Well, for them, because they're at the bottom of a mega lake, and every time it rains, it just keeps refilling, and it doesn't drain. And then it fills again, and that's where their villages are, and suddenly their houses are 10 feet underwater. And it won't drain off, because this is the new cycle coming back. So the disservice that was done from a lot of publications to tell people that Africa was going to dry into infinitum, and to encourage people to follow the water level down with their towns and villages and infrastructure. And then suddenly it reversed, and now we are coming into big water again. The Sahel is going to green. And a lot of you, I don't know how many of you have read the Quran or delved into the prophecies in that text, or the Colburn Bible, or the Vedas, or the Bible itself from Christian tradition. It all talks about the deserts greening again in the end days. And I'm not talking the end days in like the end, but this transition of our world into a new something different. They all talk about that. And here we are, the deserts are starting to green again. And, if it's that vast and that large of a change, then it would have to be global. And it would have to signal the change of an age. And when that change of an age occurs, do you think our infrastructure or the system of government or the present economy could hold through such a vast, global, all-encompassing change? I'm going to say absolutely no, because you could talk all night, but really just food production's affected. If there's not enough food on the planet to feed everybody, then we have a very big problem. And this seems to be what is occurring, although, caveat, these areas in Africa, in the Sahel in North Africa, are going to become much wetter, which means they're going to become new food growing zones on the planet. While other places are going to begin to go really low on the yields, like Canada, northern China, these types of it. Europe, for example. So if Africa becomes much greener and becomes a food production location on the planet, and a huge amount of new investment flows in there, how would you get the population out? Because they're going to be very not welcoming, because they've seen colonialism happen a couple of times. So it'll be colonialism 2.0. So there's going to be a lot of resistance of you taking your capital investment in there and try to set up grow zones and bring multinationals in and get that thing set up. So how would you make everybody leave without a fight? We'll talk about that when we come back. Second hour right here, Civilization Cycle. Remember, head on over to civilizationcycle.com. And thank you for everybody with the Buy Me a Coffee at Civilization Cycle as well.
It's unknown if early man knew they would be the progenitors of great civilizations, or if they knew when their empires would fall and disappear into history. Fortunately for us as modern man, we can recognize that we are at the precipice, a point in history where we can see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us.
Did you have the best day you've ever had in your entire life today?
It's unknown if early man knew they would be the
and the smart ones are eating beef. Let me tell you a brief history, or more accurately, a beef history of dinner. Domestication of cattle happened around 8000 BC, but that's not when beef became what's for dinner. We've been eating beef since times before history. The earliest cave paintings have beef eloquently depicted on the walls. Those cave drawings of the hunt were for the aurochs, a primitive bovine. That's right, beef. Like I said, people are having dinner now, and the smart ones, well, they're eating beef. Americans want great food today, but we also want to have great food to eat if things go south in a hurry. Unlike most companies that take the cheapest, worst parts of the cow, then turn them into beef crumbles, whatever that is, they freeze-dry them in hopes that their customers will never actually try to eat it. Our premium beef cubes are sous vide, freeze-dried, and ready to be eaten right now, or in a decade from now. We want you to eat our beef now, so you can buy more. Prep with steaks, not with beef crumbles. This is a high-quality product. It's all American beef and 100% natural. None of that craziness of lab-grown meat and mRNA jabs. Our beef has a shelf life of 10+ years. This is high-quality cooked and freeze-dried beef for long-term storage or not. Eat well today and eat well tomorrow. Click the link in the description to get your Prepper beef with Prepper All Naturals, so you will always know what's for dinner. Howdy, partner. You know people are having dinner and the smart ones are eating beef. Let me tell you a brief history, or more Howdy, partner. You know people are having dinner in the...
And then actuate on those patterns. And then use that for the betterment of humanity. Because that's really the point of even being alive on this planet, is to, enhance this planet and enhance everybody who's on this and give ourselves all better lives. Because if that is your main goal, is in increasing the enjoyment of your life that reflects on others, and imagine if that was everybody's mind frame, as I want to make this place the most abundant, joyful place to live in the universe. And if that's the way we went through our waking daily lives, imagine that frequency and what kind of just treasure it could draw in terms of emotion and physical goods that can keep us comfortable. Before we went on break, I was really talking about, Africa and Sahel and Revolution Radio. Thank you for letting me talk about this tonight. And Ransom, thank you for running the tech behind as we are getting the show graphics up here as we move through the second hour. But a lot of stations and a lot of platforms, you just can't really talk about these issues without being more, I wouldn't say completely taken off the platforms, but just the algorithms aren't pushing it, and even the organic reach on it, even if they're trying to share it, it just doesn't get shared further. You get like one share and that's it, and then the algo doesn't pick it up like, hey, that's a popular topic, let's push it further. It's not exactly being kicked off. I don't know what you call it. It's an algo downgrade, and it seems to be happening to a lot of voices who have relevant thoughts. So Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk tonight. And if you consider free speech something of value, revolution.radio, consider a donation up there in the donate tab. And, this world that we're moving into, one of the biggest things I'd seen years ago when I was surveying this whole, change based on grand solar minimum and what these planets were going to do right now in October, as in next month, and the effects electromagnetically and how the human perception might change on how we review reality in front of us, and that the government would need to pivot from that to try to maintain control, because the old system of governance would no longer fit in the new vibratory field. So at that point, I'm like, there's going to be a lot of changes economically. There's going to be a lot of changes governmentally. And if they can't control it or hold it together, I just, at that point, I didn't know if they would be going to war, if they would just like be more draconian, or if they would, I don't know. I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't, because we're not at this magnetic field intensity yet where it starts. Something's going to change in the way that you perceive the world around you. That's all I can really guarantee on this thing. Is there going to be a mass awareness, not in like a kumbaya sense where, this utopian, everybody won. It's going to be that the way you view the politicians or the banking system, or just the way that even something as simple as retirement or voting itself, or just how you have to pay for mortgages, or why you have to buy water, and why are we the only species on the planet that needs to pay for its existence? That kind of questioning, that depth and deepness of reviewing everything around you. Because that was kind of a deep statement. We are the only species on the planet that needs to pay to be here, to exist. If you work that too in the mind, like how also is that Rubik's cubed out to your thoughts and belief systems are built to create the world that these supposed aristocratic, moneyed, more 1,000-year-old families want you to build for it. And I would say it, not them. They are an invasive hominid species, an it. So once I was looking through all these changes here, I was like, there's going to be massive amounts of economic, governmental change, and there's going to be huge, huge, huge population migration, because that's another key thing. If you're going to look at, the fingerprints of this grand solar minimum, or the fingerprints of these changing electromagnetic cycles as well. One thing that occurs again and again, and the study I've done, and I really tried to go back as far as I could, and I was looking around, like, say, 8,000 years prior, 8,000 BC, I should even say going back 10,000 years after the Younger Dryas, but really probably about 8,000 years ago when you started to get the first clay figurines, quote unquote. Like, where were they based? Where did these people pop out of first? And then how did it form? And could we see ebbs and flows of this creativity, apex of society and then collapse, and then apex of society and then collapse, and then apex, and it just has a cycle to it also. Like, what is the trigger point for either of those, either the building back or the collapsing down? And then subsequently from that, then there's a pattern that occurs every single time. There's three things that happen every one of those cycles. It's population migration. People move for a better place to live. If there's no jobs or no opportunity, you're going to leave and you're going to move. I don't care if it's 79 AD, 1600 AD, or now 2024 AD. If it's not conducive and it's dangerous and you have no opportunity, you're going to leave. You're going to want your family to have a better opportunity somewhere, including yourself. And those that don't are wiped out from history, and you see it again and again. If you didn't get the warning sign and didn't leave, well, perhaps that is survival of the fittest, and that's a cruel way to say it, but maybe it is the survival of the fittest in the mind, the mental acuity as well as the physical abilities. So you get this population migration, the economy, I'm not going to say crashes, it changes, because we didn't have digital economy before in the 1600s. Barely was coming on to the understanding of paper and lending of gold at that time, just even as early as the 1400s. Like this whole lending of thing on paper and the usury and interest charged on money, this is a relatively new thing in hindsight of 8,000 years. So the economy is always going to shift. It could collapse, but at that time they were always using hard money. They were using gold and silver and also different commodities as barterables and trading time of skill. So a collapse of that economy it's very difficult to even equate it to what today's stock market is, because nobody's holding gold in their pocket as a tradable. That's a daily use money system. That's hard money. That's very difficult to even to compare an economic collapse in terms of today, because it really would go to zero. Nobody's got gold or silver in their pocket, and it goes to zero as digits on a screen, and you're like, what? We got nothing. But back then, if the ship didn't come into town, you still had the gold and the silver in the pocket, and somebody would trade for something, and you still had skills that you could trade, and it was very different. The economy shifted, and that's all. I can't say it collapsed back then. It shifted. We could collapse, but it's a shift also, but back then it was really a shift more than it was. And again, each subsequent time you go back to the 1300s, start seeing around 800 AD, 535 or 540, somewhere around there. Back to the Roman era. You could go as far back as you want, and there's a shift. So population moves, economy shifts, and then the way that the government oversees the people of the time also shifts or moves or changes. So walk with me for a second here. We're coming into this time. I want to do a big mind experiment with you, and I'm going to explain the mind experiment and try to walk down my train of thought. And then also in the comment box, please, as I get to the end of it, if you could, kind of end off, what would you think? What do you think about this? That's the whole important thing. What do you think? I'm going to explain the story here. So the cycles were pointing to his grand solar minimum coming in heavy right about now. The 2020s was when it would be visible for all the population to see. And from that point, it was going to start to get, upset. And governments were going to have to control it. And you knew, and everybody knew, that crop losses were going to occur and that food prices were going to go up very, very high, right to the point where we are now, where a lot of people are going to spend more on food and they will have nothing left at all for no entertainment, no travel, no expendable, disposable income. And this is where you're just only working for the basics, and the rest of the economy would start dying on the vine, but people's happiness level plummets. Right, so you knew that was already baked in the cake. This is way back in like 2014, looking out to now. And it's interesting, all those, I wouldn't even say forecasts, it was just like looking at cycles and predicting the same thing would happen just in the modern era. And approximately in the 2020s, right in the beginning, it would start to really show itself again. There was no forecasting. It was just really looking at cycles, what happened in those cycles, and then just kind of overlapping in today's modern age. And then, okay, what is the possibility? So the crop losses are here, and it's going to get more expensive. Now, the whole thing is I didn't take into consideration really so much about the infrastructure damage at that point. I knew the storms were going to get bigger, just as every cycle it did. But with our modern infrastructure, with the engineering that we have today, it's going to be far better than some wooden bridge built in the 1300s. If you want to go with the traditional timeline of what you think the 1300s were like during sort of the end of the Dark Ages coming out, if you think engineering over a large river using wooden bridges would be better than our concrete superstructures on top of high tensile wires, suspension bridges, if you think that engineering would be better on a wood bridge in the 1300s than a suspension bridge of today, you're kind of at that level there. So almost everything got wiped out and damaged during those times of upheaval in our climate system. Well, mud on my face. Here it is. I thought our infrastructure, a lot of it would be able to cope with, even at a doubling or tripling or quadrupling. I was thinking around 10x on the weather increase. Yeah, then our infrastructure wouldn't hold. But I'm finding right now that what we're receiving today, which is nowhere close to where the maximum will be on this, is still just wreaking havoc on our infrastructure, from roads to bridges. I mean, every time I look at a flood, there's another bridge gone. I mean, you could see dozens of floods every day, and you're looking at dozens, if not hundreds of bridges getting wiped away every day on the planet. Like, how many times can you do that? There are how many countries of hundreds of bridges have gone per day, especially when there's larger floods, and then not have some toll on that. And then you're looking at also the conduit within the earth of those pipelines that get ruptured during the same time. I'm starting to see a lot more like just fires that are shooting out of pipelines. That's because the pipeline itself, the conduit, got ripped because the earth shifted slightly. And then there was, a leak. And if you're looking at those fires that are coming out of pipes from beneath the earth, I think I've seen 6 or 7 in the last 2 months. They used to be really rare. Another thing that was predicted during this time is the same conduit holding the fiber optic cables and our internet cables and underground electricity cables, for those of you in the city, would start to break and have a lot more outages as well because of the crust slipping and moving. My prediction here, and I will say, based on past cycles, is as we move closer into this next month and a half, as we get into October, toward the middle of October, you're going to see a lot more outages of communications. Now, why would I say that? Well, if you're going to continue to rip cable all the time under whatever city, you're going to eventually get into a trunk area, and that will cause an outage. So look for that and be prepared for that. And electrical outage, too, would follow the same thing if you're underground and if your infrastructure is run underground for electrical on cities. If you take that pipe and you move it 100 feet and twist it another 100 feet south on a landslide or on an actual earth slip, like, you can't tell me that's not going to cut or rip and actually short out something. I understand they build in just like they do bridges, when it freezes or, there's some heavy load on it, it can expand or it can move a little bit, a couple feet, but you're not talking like a 50-foot movement on a regular bridge build. It's the same thing. They have some certain stress specifications inside conduit and piping that's buried. But once it exceeds that, then, it's almost as if it wasn't even there. So that's also another thing that was, predicted through cyclic activity and effect. So here's where now it comes down to all these storms are starting to take effect. The food prices are getting higher to the point where there's really not very much disposable income left. So whatever disposable income left, the rest of this year, the food price is going to continue to go up because of the losses we've experienced right now. So food's going to even get more expensive, which is going to strain even more, and it's going to become more of a societal issue, I do believe, by the end of the year here, than it has been up to this point. So somewhere, with all these crop losses occurring, there has to be a new area on the planet we can grow the food. Now, one of them is Myanmar. And, the way I started this Adapt 2030 channel, I was doing business down there. I was buying coffee. And we would export it up to Taiwan. And then from there, it was taken up to Japan. But they used to process it and put it in pour over bags and then take it up to Japan as a finished product. That area in Myanmar itself was only 50% used of its arable land, but factoid, in the 1960s, Myanmar was considered the rice basket of Asia. They produced more rice in Myanmar than they did in China in the early 1960s. But only half their land's being currently farmed at the moment. So that is an area on the planet that could absolutely increase its crop productivity, and it's really far south, and you could double rotate, and so that would be a winner there, check. But have you heard about Myanmar in the news lately? Yes, you have. It seems like it's being destabilized there on purpose. Much like Africa was destabilized for how many centuries? Until we need it right now. So if Africa becomes a new growing zone, and here's where the mind experiment comes in. How are you going to pay the people that are coming from all over the world? Because you have to, now Ransom, can you do me a favor and look this up for me? The actual size of Africa, because the maps that we have currently do not relatively show how large Africa is. You know, you look on the map and you go, oh, well, it's just another continent there. But in reality, you could put a full America in it, you could put a full India into it, and you could put a full Europe into it at the same time. And that's the size of it. And there would still be heaps of room left over for possibly in Indonesia at the bottom there. You know, it is an enormous, it is so deceiving how the maps look. If you were able to build out a new grow zone, this would be the world's largest investment project, hands down, bar none. The amount of money required to turn the African Sahel into a full grow, like you consider Iowa, for example, or somewhere in Kansas. Like the amount of infrastructure, what would you need to put in there? I mean, keeping that behemoth of agribiz going alone is just trillions in investment with a T. Because you would need new roads, you would need new irrigation canals, like just even the concrete and the asphalt, just for those two things. But then you need all the engineering, you need the machinery for that. Like, how do you pay for all the labor, and where do all these machines come from? And then you need pumping stations, obviously, for the water. You're going to need, obviously, you're going to need the petrol stations or gasoline stations. You're going to need tires. You're going to need all of this stuff. For an entire continent to build it out, to turn it into, oh, there it is. Yay. Oh, is that a whole China? Excuse me. That was a whole China, whole India, and whole United States, lower 48, squeezed in Africa with tons of room left over, heaps of room left over. You could probably squeeze another continent if you could bend it correctly. You could put an enormous amount of countries inside there. How many Russias can you squeeze into Africa is the question. Probably 2, 3. So we're going to take all this money on a fourth turning, and it's got to disappear, it's got to move, it's got to flow. So you can look at the Western nations as they're being bankrupted. Now, if you turn that upside down, it would probably fit pretty good. Now, all the Western nations are being bankrupt on purpose. You look at the Five Eyes nations, they're disposed of. They're disposable. They're going into, you can absolutely see, and they're being liquidated. So something for me also signals that the powers that be on the planet understand wherever these countries are that exist now, they're not going to be very viable in the future for economy or food growing compared to what they were before. So you're going to need to set up in a new area. You're going to need to take the world's economy and shift it to something else without spooking the people. Oh, it's the BRICS. The BRICS just decided a couple of years ago to form and go outside the US dollar. It's not because the new magnetic field's coming up and because the last 6 times this cycles have recurred in history, the economy shifted. No, it's not because of that. It's because the BRICS just started to form 4 years ago. And suddenly 190 or 180 countries are going over to the BRICS right now with a gold-backed system. Oh, just magically this year. Really? Okay, I'll play. But anyway, the BRICS are going to need to put all that investment into somewhere new as United States, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Canada get liquidated, in addition to probably a couple others that are not on my list there. But you're going to need, the only way you're going to be able to pay somebody is you're going to be able to pay them in gold or stable coins. Because if you're going to take them to Africa to work, and I don't care where you come from on the planet, Nobody is going to trust an African money. If you get money out of Mali, would you pay my salary? Would you take Malian money? Would you take the Nigerian national currency as your local pay and then get on an airplane and take it back to America and try to convert it? No. And this was one of the greatest problems they were finding with workers even from like Chad to Sudan. The exchange rate, even on the same border, like one country over with the same border, sharing the border, sometimes it would be as high as 25, 30% for the conversion rate on the exchange rate. This is something they cannot do again. So it would be a stable coin, because a stable coin on the blockchain could be spent anywhere on the planet. And it could be paid anywhere that you are working in Africa and the Sahel in North Africa. I'll just say the Sahel in North Africa. The investment pouring in there is going to restart the global economy. And as you saw with Ransom putting up the largeness of there, we could put at least one India, one China, and one United States just inside Africa. And that African Sahel is larger than the lower 48 itself. So you're thinking about something that encompasses the better part of Canada and all of the lower 48 U.S. That's only the area I'm talking about in North Africa and the Sahel. That's going to be the new grow zone of our planet. Put that in perspective a second. You could take trillions of dollars and just dump it in there for decades, plural, and you still wouldn't probably outfit that place to its fullest potential. But the problem is there were people living there. And they've seen colonialism come and go a fair few times. How many wars, how much resource destruction, theft has gone on there through the centuries. But they would see it again, like you're going to come down, you're going to take all of Chad, all of Sudan, all the way from Ethiopia. You want Mali, Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, you want Ghana, Togo, Benin, Burkina Faso, Nigeria. You're going to take Somalia. You're going to take it all. You want Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, too. Grab it all. Colonialism 2.0. By the way, we're going to grow food everywhere. Of course, they're going to say, hey, no. We're going to control this. We're going to control the investment. You got to go through, and a lot of money will get stolen, obviously, in bribes. But we're going to take the money. We're going to control it. We're going to invest it. We're going to use local people for this. And there'd be a huge backlash of, no, you're not taking the profits out of the country. No, absolutely no way would this be acceptable if there was a viable male fighting population there. Because if you look at the number of men who have left that same area with that promise of a better future in whatever country, the carrot that they put in front of them, you realize that 20 million plus males of fighting age have left that area in the Sudan and North Africa and the Sahel. 20 million. That is the largest standing army on the planet. They've gone somewhere else. They're not there to resist when they come in to put the new grow zone in. They're gone. And see, that's kind of the sneakiness of it. They promised them something else. They landed in all these northern hemisphere countries, you know what I mean? And that's a one-way ticket. They're not going back. They've done this decade or so in advance of knowing this same time was here. So you're going to turn it into the newest, largest grow zone on the planet, but now there's going to be no resistance to any multinationals going in there. That's the whole genius of it, but I hate to use that word genius because it implies something positive. But the amount of planning and forethought to put this thing into play, I mean, it's on the genius level, but in a nefarious way. And what I'd heard also in addition to this, adding on to it was, I can't validate this, but it's just some hearsay and talk, a couple papers I've read. World Economic Forum referenced it once. World Bank was talking about what that was that the new Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, on how to put 6 more dams down, going down to where the White and the Blue Nile meet, and then having hydroelectric spread through there and starting that as the first quote unquote economic zone because they'd have constant electricity. And that is your spearhead into what I just described as the new largest growing zone on the planet. That will be Port Sudan coming out. And I think they had built another port there down there in Tanzania that they'd expanded and worked on so they can get the grains out and the food out. But the whole thing was they were saying when food production goes down and, you know, America's liquidated, Australia's liquidated, Canada is too, they're not going to let the economy come back and flourish like it has. They're going to let it stagnate and go to almost no food production here. And the way I was reading it, now maybe I was reading between the lines or maybe I was just misinterpreting it. They wanted to set up the same area in the Sahel in North Africa as a single grow zone on the planet, centralize it because they could put all the green inventions out there, the new green agendas and some of the newest energy production techniques, and they could centralize it. That way they could control all the emissions coming off of it. And it would be a singular grow zone, and all that food produced in Africa would then be exported out to the nations that needed the food. So it would be a single production source of all North Africa of the food for the world. And I was thinking, that's a lot of control. If you're going to produce all the world's food in a single location and be responsible for who gets that food, then that's kind of a dangerous game for anybody to play. So that is the plan. That's absolutely been written about many a time. Now, the stable coin and running on Algorand, Circle, you know, again, this was some of the reports and things and research I'd done. That was almost 3 years ago. Now, things could have changed since then. But that was absolutely the plan, is to pay those foreign workers in stable coins and to move the new, and if you believe in there's such a thing called the fourth turning, was the new prosperous beginning age of stabilization of the beginning of the new fourth turning would center and restart and grow roots, no pun intended, in that same area of Africa to restart the global economy. And they were talking about this as if it was already like written in stone, as in 80 years, you will not know the difference between an African neighborhood and an American neighborhood. In terms of, think about it going back several years, in terms of prosperity and opulence, and everybody has everything, that equivalent, not the rundown, stagnated ridiculousness that it's become prior to that, when it used to be something. That's what they expect all of Africa to be like, at least North Africa and the Sahel. And you're like, wait, these are the poorest countries on the planet. How is this going to turn around? Oh, it's going to be a gold-backed currency, a resource-backed currency, which Africa has plenty of. So they're going to be the wealthiest nations in the new issuance of currencies and money. Because if the whole new system, and it's it, if it's based on gold and natural resources, Africa has both, the most on the planet. So they are going to be the wealthiest countries on the planet in this new economic system. And then you start to, would that make sense then, how they could have the equivalent of the most beautiful neighborhoods in America, and let's say, the late 1990s or something, that kind of level was where they're expecting it or planning it, whatever word you like to use, to go to. So how do you set that up? Now, this is where we come into now. Okay, how do you keep that movement forward without allowing people to get spooked so they don't believe in the system anymore? And how do you keep people believing in the system to keep investing for the future 30, 40, 50 years from now? When they start to see bolides rolling through the atmosphere on a minutely, not a daily, a minutely or an hourly, then what? Like, this is the whole thing, is it's about perception control from this point. And DeFries over here on Rumble Adapt 2030 channel in the chat says U.S. extracted $2 billion worth of oil over 2 decades from Iraq and Iran. No, from Iraq. Okay, Iraq asked for $1 billion. Yeah, I remember that story. So they took $12 billion out in sales of oil, and then Iraq asked for $1 billion back, and they said nope. And that's when Iraq banned the use of the dollar. So they'd stolen all that money and never intended to give a single penny back. But that was the promise, because that was the old world order, the way it was. I'm wondering how much they were able to issue debt off of that by, I don't know, the getting the physical cash back versus allowing get treasuries or something might be different. But Africa is and will be the most powerful, wealthiest continent in this new. Like if we were to have the same conversation 70 years from now, that you go, damn, how'd you even see that coming? As we're sitting in a nice air-conditioned posh cafe in the middle of Chad, overlooking the Riviera River of the refilling Lake Chad. You know, this is the kind of thing off the marble veranda. You know what I mean? This is what is expected for Africa. And in 70 years, we could envision this to happen. Don't forget about the 30 to 40,000 gallons we steal from Syria each month. Is that barrels, perhaps? 34,000 barrels. Syrians are not having it either. So we're coming to the end of what was considered the order. So let's see. Okay. Herb Green says again, those stone frequency rings that Michael Tellinger found stretch up from South Africa through the new and old grow regions. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. David Stig Hansen, you got to check out this guy's channel. David Stig Hansen. His channel is about Atlantis. Was this Atlantis? He does he's been out to the Rakat structure a couple of times. Actually, 3 times he's been out to the Rakat structure in Africa, the Eye of Africa, that like round geologic formation. He's been out there 3 times in person. But I've known him for years. And, I looked through satellite stuff with him there and like going on Google Earth, and there is an enormous amount of abandoned cities out there, incredible amounts of stonework and stone circles that exist. Like, and if you go to Jordan or Saudi Arabia, look for these thing called kites, Kite, and it is very similar to what those stone circles are in South Africa that Michael Tellinger has done research on, has something to do with gold mining and resonance frequency. They're all over South Africa. They're all over Saudi Arabia and Jordan as well. So if you can do some sort of line, that seems like they were connected at one point as well. But all over that same area of the Sudan, there's some very ancient history there just under the sand. We have not even remotely touched it. I mean, the continent is so gigantic, and so much sand and debris covers that northern part of the continent. Once it greens again, can you imagine? Like, I am going to make a bold statement. I bet you, every single time they start to till the new fields out there in the middle of the desert, when it becomes much greener and they have irrigation and the above ground rainwater has, increased, and then they're pumping from the aquifers and it's really getting green and they're getting maximum production out there and just rocking it on the yields. Every time they till, they're going to hit something. They're going to hit stones from a foundation of something. Those, when they're tilling at the commercial level, they're going way deep comparatively. So I bet they're going to be finding ruins after treasure when they go out there and start tilling this place and put it into ag zone use. There's so much lost history. So much. Because you go back 6,000 years and that whole area was forest anyway. Fast forward 6,000 years, it's desert. So this flip-flop has come. And see, this another thing about the whole climate debate was it's almost as they've given us an excuse. So when these changes occurred right now, there would already be an excuse built into it. So you wouldn't get worried that the weather was changing around you, that the climate cycle had changed, that the storms were getting more intense, that the migrations of birds, whales, mammals, bees, insects was off. Like, oh, it's all climate, it's all global warming. The excuse was already given to you. So when we arrived at this point right now, they could bake a couple things into the cake. They could keep, again, the perception optics in line. Weather changes, don't care. You're just going to think it's because of the CO2. Same time, they can push into new investments and new energy. And then at the same time, they can say all these countries are, being destroyed because of climate change and everybody's allowed to migrate to different places. Again, check the box. You need to get the fighters out of there because you're gonna come back in and try to take that land back. You can't have a resistance force there, so you need to get them out. But it's a very kind way. You've enticed them with carrots up to different places with free pieces of paper. Okay, well, you're going to go back in and steal their real gold and their real diamonds and their real silver and their real minerals back out of there again. And food. Food's going to be a real important one this time. So to set up the grow zone where there's minerals, and can you imagine having that continent, like full food production, full mineral production, full gold production going on, but not in like a nasty, deep pit mine way, but in a more genteel way of dealing with the planet and the land that we're on. And I believe there's frequency generators out there and different types of frequency technologies that would allow you to separate rock and actually pull the atoms out without actually having to blast or move or crush or dissolve anything in the process of going from A to B right now to get a piece of metal out of the ground. I really believe, and there's been a fair few articles in the last weeks or so talking about pressures during earthquakes inside specifically quartz veins, that when the pressures from the bedrock around the quartz would change and tweak, that there's electricity released through the quartz, and by that electromagnetic release, it unbinds specifically gold atoms and allows those to flow into this low pressure system in the rocks. And as it tweaks back again, whoosh, that stops, and all those gold atoms are encapsulated and trapped, and they become gold veins. This is why when you find quartz with the gold, they think there's a correlation now between those two. So now reverse that, re-engineer that with me. What if you had a machine and technologies that could do the same thing, but frequency-based, that could remove specific targeted atoms, structure? We got the periodic table of elements. Can you not turn into number 93? Station number 93. Oh, what element would that be? I mean, obviously the gases, no. But if you're coming into mineral substrates and mineral deposits, I absolutely believe frequency would be a far better way to pull that out than, well, digging or blasting. But again, there would be very little money in it. It would only be for the betterment of the planet. Like, you wouldn't need all of those. Think about the machinery, the fuels used. I call that engineering schools that are involved in that. The conveyor belts themselves. And if you're going to do anything with like precious metals, you're going to need to dissolve that. You're going to need some slurry of sorts. You need electroplates to take it out, another secondary harvesting. None of that would be needed, like none of it. You wouldn't need the big digging engines. You wouldn't need the dump trucks. You wouldn't need the haulers. You wouldn't need anything, nothing. You would need some equipment in there to electromagnetically separate your target material out of the substrate. And using frequency would be the best way to do it. But it doesn't pay to do that. It would be just for really getting the metals for humanity. Now, I was going somewhere with that. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Ransom, thank you for pulling that up. I think you and I had talked about that a couple weeks or something prior. The formation of orogenic gold deposits by progressive movement of a fault fracture mesh through a transition zone. So this is exactly what they're talking about, is pressure conditions and recrystallization of vein quartz, sulfide minerals. Yeah. If you come into that on your master's thesis, yeah, you're going to get a few people looking at that, huh? Because I was always at the volition as well. Excuse me, my throat was getting dry. Got iced coffee in front of me right here. Need to work through the evening and finish another video when we're done. A lot of times electromagnetically, I bet that we had, mined all the gold, but with these same kind of papers coming out, and I'll take it to the planetary level instead of just a localized earthquake. Imagine if the entire solar system goes through some sort of electromagnetic change. The Bible talks about, and Indian Vedic texts talk about, and almost every tradition, even the Quran, talks about the sun setting. In the Chinese also, the sun reversed. They used to set in the east and then rise in the west. And then there's also tales of the sun sat still for the better part of a single day and didn't move. That happens at a 0-point field. And when I say there's no magnetic field on the sun, so inversely, there's no magnetic field on the planet. So when that were to occur, I would say atoms are in free flow and they're gravitating electrically back to their base forms again. Because that's really the only charge that they would recognize, was that another of itself atom. Boom. And it would not be dependent on a magnetic field, because our Earth could slip on itself too. Now, I'm not really a believer of Hapgood's crustal displacement, but I'm saying if it were to occur, that would be it, when there's a zero magnetic field on our planet and there's no longer a locking of the crust and the mantle. And those two could slip. The only reason they're locked now is because there's a difference in positive, negative charge on those two. But minerals would come back into veins again and form massive veins. So every ounce of gold mined on the planet will probably refill during a zero magnetic field event. And then once the magnetic field snapped back in place, just like those papers reference, those quartz veins, or those veins, would suddenly solidify hard again, and boom, then we have what you consider gold veins to be found once more. And then over erosion, over thousands and thousands of years, those nuggets roll into the stream, for example. You know, because we were talking about the Cherokee, you're finding gold, and there's some gold mining areas down near Coca Creek. And yeah, the stories where the Cherokee would come in, they would just find gold nuggets literally laying in the streams. And I'm wondering how many other places that was common, where there'd been so much erosion over thousands and thousands of years since the last, I wouldn't say reset, but magnetic field anomaly, that this is an ongoing cycle in itself, of the replenishing, regenerating of the Earth. So we could mine that. And it would be quite easy to do. Again, if you were not so concerned about profit, and people over profit, but I'm not in that whole, genre of DEI, people over profit. I'm just like, as a species on this planet, could we not work together in a better fashion to kind of kick this darkness that's trying to rule over us back to the dustbin for several thousand more years? Could we not live more harmonious lives for all of us together as a species on this planet, so there is no war and we can get this disease thing solved without the, could we not live in a world that I would see on Star Trek somewhere, where they actually live in peace across a planet? Is that outside the realm of possibility? I mean, maybe Star Trek is actually a documentary of other civilizations around either our galaxy or other galaxies. I think that would be an awesome place to live, in one of those planets where there was no war and everybody helped everybody else live better lives. I mean, wow, just even to spend one lifetime on that planet, wouldn't that be a joy? But nope, you got to pay for the gas to go to work. You got to pay for your food to go to work, or you need to buy the food and pay tax on the food when you go to work. You got to pay tax on the gasoline to go to work, and then when you get to work and you earn the money, you need to pay the tax on the money you made. And then you got to buy a house, but then you need to pay tax on that when you buy the house. But then when you sell the house, you have to pay even a bigger tax called a capital gains tax, because you made money on the house, but you already got taxed first on the money you made going to your job, paying those taxes to then buy the house. And there's a sales tax on the house, closing fees, county fees, whatever it is, property taxes. Like outside that world, wouldn't that be, just think of and envision a world where you didn't have to pay even for electricity because it was generated off the Earth's magnetic field. And you didn't have to combust anything. There was actually no cost in it, except the initial setup of discs and magnets. And then you magically had electricity in your house for as long as you needed it. Like that kind of world. There would be no pollution. And once you understand that those spinning magnet discs, if you turn them, horizontally, they just naturally want to take off up into the sky anyway. They go weightless anyway by themselves. You don't even have to try. The problem is you got to try to keep holding them down. Because I remember when Dr. Brown in the 1960s was doing a bunch of experiments, but they had them on tethers. That's the electromagnetic, electrogravitics is the proper name. The electrogravitics, they were like 3 foot in diameter saucers, but they kept flying away. And the first ones they did, went so far they never found it again. So they started to put them on tethers because that is one of the byproducts of this type of magnetic motor is electrical generation and weightlessness, both. And they found also that if you kept them in a horizontal position, but you revved up the RPMs to, I think it was 1400 is when they start to go weightless. But if you turn it up a little bit faster than that, say 15 to 1800 RPMs in there, it started to discharge electricity. And that was the whole thing, is a lot of times the early UFOs, they would see where there would be like a lightning discharge coming out from beneath it. And then you knew for sure it was electrogravitics, that they were using magnetic motor propulsion. And the byproduct of that was literally a discharge of electricity. So, these devices are possible. So let me read a couple more comments here. We're coming to the end of the hour. Thank you, everybody, listening tonight. I was solo, and again, Ransom's running over on the graphics and keeping us plugged into some visuals tonight. Thank you, Ransom, for doing that. Thank you, everybody out there listening. Please remember, civilizationcycle.com. If you want to get the show notes, it's 8 bullet points of things that I've discussed in the first and second hour in a single one-pager. That way you can print it off. It's literally one page. You can print it off, have those show notes with you, bullet points to start conversations, pass it on to somebody else as an interesting conversation starter. Let me get into like I said, I was going to try to get into the comments, but you can just put your email in below. And in 80 years, the American neighborhood will look run down compared to the Sahel. I would absolutely agree, and I don't think it's going to take 80 years. I would think it's going to be far, far less, like 10, 20 maybe. Because you got to realize the liquidation of this continent, it's really the liquidation of a system. And yes, the economy is going to follow that, and the form of governance is going to follow that. It's a liquidation of the way of a system, because a new system is being set up. So you can't have concurrent systems of dominance on the planet. One is going to dominate. And the other one that usually, I mean, if you use the British Empire too, I mean, look at the sun never set. And now, their currency, yeah, it's sort of strong on international banking, but does the average person use the British pound? No, they don't even use silver in their money any longer. You can see a shrinkage, but this is something very different where the U.S. dollar is going in comparison to all the rest of the reserve currencies through the last bit of time. 80 years? I don't know. Okay, so Herb Green says they are preparing for another ice age in the north as they empty out the south and prepare to move the empire. That's a pretty good assessment right there. And again, the magnetic field changes are going to accompany anything on this, what you consider perceived ice age, because they're in tandem. The sun shuts down into a very dim star. And the result of that is not because it itself became a dim star. It's because the Birkeland current that we sit on, that is in our regional star system, that our star also sits on, in this string of pearls, the energy flow is cut from that. And somehow the Mayans knew it, and they called it above the ecliptic and below the ecliptic. They knew the charge would change at this 0 point line. Like, they probably could have described it much better had they known our technology and verbiage in our technology. But above this line is positive, below this line is negative, and right when you cross over that point, generally the stars go dimmer and you go into an ice age for a minute, is what pretty much the Mayan texts say. So they're preparing for another ice age. I would say at first here, we're going to prepare for another electromagnetic disturbance at the minimum. Cometary bombardment here coming up in February, March, April, May of next year. Because as we pass through this dual field right here coming up in October, as we spin through that, we're sandwiched between two magnetic fields. And then as we come around out of that later into the spring in the Northern Hemisphere, and into late spring and early summer, the planet is out on the outside of the sun by itself. There's nothing else behind us. Now, some people want to say gravity. Okay, if you want to go with that one, all the gravity bodies are all directly behind us, pulling like an arrow, and we are just out in front of even the sun. The sun's behind us. Jupiter's behind us. Mercury's behind us. Saturn, Neptune, everybody's behind us. Mars, Venus is all behind us, pulling everything and gravitationally through us first to get to the sun, and then all the big body planets behind us. That in itself would be something that would be resetting, and that would scare a lot of people. I'm not going to lie, that would scare a lot of people. Can you imagine fireballs coming through every night and some of them getting through? Just Chelyabinsk was a good example of what you might expect on a daily. Like when it gets to a Chelyabinsk on every day kind of thing, that's going to frighten a lot of people. One every 5 years, like at that level, okay, that's just space debris. One coming in every day, and like hundreds of smaller ones every day, that the skies are just lighting up daytime as you're seeing daytime fireballs come rolling in day after day after day, everywhere around the world. It won't be just like one location. It'll be everywhere, every day. And can you imagine how that is going to affect people's belief in the future? So we're going to have to go through that first, but I absolutely agree. We are stepping down into another ice age. Will it happen tomorrow? No. But the trajectory is cooler and cooler and cooler. Now, we don't know how fast truly the entry into an ice age is. There's been a lot of new research, peer-reviewed research, going through the best they can do with ice cores. And I understand the compression and, gas is trapped in there. But the thickness of the ice sheets doesn't really match with the age that they say it is. That's a contentious issue after finding the bombers from World War II, which they thought would be like, 4 feet under snow, turned out to be 70 feet in ice in Greenland. So if you want to go with so far what they can drill to the bottom or they hit the rock again, some of the research they found is these ice ages can trigger in as quickly as 10 years. That's scary. I always thought it took 1,000 years to enter, but it's gonna be a minute. I really believe that it's kind of edges off, and then it gets cooler, and it steps down cooler, average temperature 1 to 2 degrees cooler, and then it averages 1 to 2 degrees cooler for the next bit, and it just not an instant drop 14 or 15 degrees or 30 degrees Fahrenheit down in a matter of a decade on average temperature. That'd be scary if it did. And hold on, I lost my not only my train of thought, but I lost my here we go. Yeah, it takes a particular type of person to be able to survive on a dark and damp rocky island sitting in the Atlantic. And I'll tell you it takes a special type of stamina to exist in an underground city. Because I've been to a couple underground cities. I went to Dernyanku. Also went to, and this is around in Cappadocia in the same area. Everything was underground there. This place called Gorame in Cappadocia. And the most recent one I was into was a place called Neumo in the Czech Republic. All three of those, I have the same, I can't stay down here, man. I got to get out of here feeling. I've never been comfortable even one time in those. Going into caves is cool, going caving for a day, right? But actually when you're in those cities underground, it is so claustrophobic. Like, I don't know, if I just stand there for weeks, I would freak out. Months, I'd be like a vegetable. Years, I don't know if I'd make it, like really have to survive under years. Like that's the same thing as saying, staying on a dark, damp, rocky island sitting in the Atlantic. Same thing, like the survival of the fittest is going to be a thing, and I kid you not, it's going to be mental fitness and it's going to be physical fitness. Those two are going to be the winners, and perhaps you have one, but you don't have the other. So let me see, who else do we have here? I'm a couple years shy of 30. This is Dalvinius Tiv. I'm a couple years shy of 30. I hope I make it. Well, not hoping. See, there's your mind frame right there. I will make it. And when I do make it, I will break bread with others on the other side. and I am going to make this world a better place during the journey from here to there. It all starts with the mind frame. It really does. And you have to know that you're doing the best you can to pull through, and like you've done as much. Because if you're listening to this broadcast, you're ahead of 99% of the planet of knowing what's coming in terms of earth changes. And I do appreciate everybody listening tonight. Thank you so much for joining. Please remember civilizationcycle.com. Sign up for that show notes. We'll get you the one-pager. We'll be back next week. Revolution Radio, Studio A, 10 p.m. to midnight, broadcasting here on Rumble. You know, gallon of milk, gallon of water. Which one's more valuable in the desert? Diamond crusted gold wings. See you later. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.